Design is hard. Between trying to choose the right colors, shapes, fonts to use, crafting the perfect presentation can seem insurmountable. But there are aspects of design that you just need to stay away from and can potentially ruin your project. So I'm going to show you the 5 worst design mistakes that you need to avoid and what you can do to fix them so you can make your best presentation yet. So to start off, have you ever watched a presentation or looked at a graphic and thought, this could have just been an email? There are just too many words on the screen, so much so that your audience wants to completely tune it out. Well, this is why TLDR is a thing, and it's probably the #1 way to kill your design. Text is essential for effective design, whether it be presentations, infographics, or social media posts. So it's important to understand the design elements needed to use text effectively. This is where keeping text to a minimum in a lot of cases can really help your project stand out. You can let the image or graphic do the work at drawing your audience's attention, and the text will give the information needed to understand the main point. A simple rule is to aim for 50 to 60 characters per line. This way, if you do need a decent amount of text to communicate your messaging, it allows for easier readability from the viewer. As we'll discuss more later in this video, you'll want to use your text and also be consistent. You don't want to be using multiple different fonts when designing your presentation or graphic. Limit your design to at most 2 to 3 fonts that complement each other. Using too many fonts make a design look unprofessional. You'll also want to use fonts that make sense for the topic that you're discussing. For example, a bold sans serif font would probably look odd on a wedding invitation, while a serif font is used for that soft and wholesome vibes that you want that wedding invitee to feel. Which then brings us to choosing the right colors. Choosing the wrong colors or not using corresponding colors can absolutely ruin your design. It's not enough for colors to appeal to your preferences, they need to make sense for the emotion you want to evoke out of the viewer. Let's go back to that wedding example. With weddings, you'll often see white or shades of light pastel colors. This is meant to evoke a sense of romance and can create a calming, peaceful vibe in the viewer. If the colors we use are black, brown, and red, it would not feel like a wedding and can spark confusion in whoever sees it. But let's say we know what colors make sense for the subject matter. You also need to consider how colors complement each other. We've made multiple videos on color theory, which we'll have linked at the end of this video. But the general idea is that individual colors can work well together in a theme while others don't. You can use color palettes like green, white, and orange. These are the same colors you'll find on Ireland's flag. You can also use colors like red, orange, and yellow. These are the same colors that you'll see reflected on a sunset. Or you can use colors like blue, tan, and pink. These are the same soft colors that you'll find in something like a beach setting. But how can we make sure that what we want to stand out actually stands out? This is where it's important to understand contrast. One of the worst things to see in design is text that you just can't read. We discussed how fonts, text size, word count, and color are all vital to creating an aesthetic design, but that can all be meaningless if your audience just can't read it. You need a sufficient amount of contrast in your image so that not only is it readable, but it actually enhances the look of your project. A simple method is to use lighter text on a darker background. You can lower the exposure of your background and let that light text pop. But this also works in reverse. You can have black text on a white background. This is why almost every document that you see is written with that black text. So we covered all the elements, but how do we know how to actually form the graphic? And what goes into the structural elements of a good design? This is where you need to have a strong sense of space and balance in order for a design to flow and look appealing. You can have all the elements of design we already discussed, but if your design just looks like a jumbled mess, you will immediately turn off your audience. You'll want to use the space available to you, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to fill it. Negative space is just as important as the space that you use for graphics and text. Negative space is the space in between, and when positioned properly with the positive space, it focuses the viewer's attention on the key elements of your presentation and your design. This will help you create balance in the image. You'll want to avoid random placement of your elements just because you want them to be in your design. This will lead to that jumbled mess I mentioned earlier. This is where you'll need to be a bit of a minimalist and critical of every choice you make when choosing your elements. Does this actually need to be here? Does this really add to the design? Or is this just too much? Using only the elements that communicate the message and actively flow together will ultimately guide you towards your final design. One trick is to eliminate each element you're thinking of using. You can eliminate them one by one until the design begins to look almost nonsensical, and then you can start adding back in slowly. This will get you to the most raw form of your design. Once you've determined that minimalist framework, now you've set yourself up on that path towards that final design. But what if you're working on a presentation and have multiple design elements that you need to keep track of? Now this is where we begin to tie everything together. One way to completely lose your audience throughout a presentation is if you lack consistency, or even if you're overly consistent. In the case of lack of consistency, a theme that we discussed throughout this entire video is allowing different elements to flow off each other in order to emphasize our key elements. You need to think of a presentation like one big design, and that each slide should flow visually into the next. So you want to use those color themes in 2 to 3 fonts like we mentioned earlier. You want to have each slide look like it's part of a greater presentation. They're in itself an element. But that being said, you don't want to go too far the other way and have every slide look the same. Each one needs to have their own personality to retain the audience in a new way throughout the presentation. Keep the themes of what we discussed earlier, but play. You can be creative. Structure each slide individually in a way that makes sense for you and the presentation. Because this is ultimately what's going to separate the amateur presentations from the professionals. And if you want to level up your design skills like a professional designer, try out Visme, our all-in-one design platform that was created specifically for people like you to make designing fun and easy. You can check it out at the link down below. I'm Jason from Visme, helping you design better for your business.